Hi class, this is Sir Alex Basco and welcome to our lesson in General Biology 2. Today we are going to discuss Lesson 7 Part 1, which is all about the basic principles of animal form and function. From the previous lessons that we have, what we've learned so far is all about plants. We've learned about the growth and development of plants. We've learned about some of the organization of plants in their cells, tissues, organs, etc. And also we've learned about a very important function of plant, which is the photosynthesis, where we learn the two reactions that undergo in photosynthesis: light dependent reaction and the light independent reaction, or the Calvin cycle. So after we've learned about plants, we are going to move from talking about plants to talking about animals. And here we are going to get a little bit of knowledge in the importance of form and function among animals and even as humans. So whenever we talk about form, we're actually usually talking about something like the anatomical structure of our body. So that includes the structure of our bones, the structure of the skin on the cellular level, things like that. When we talk about function, it is the physiological aspects of our body. How these anatomical structure provides those different functions, such as our heart. It is in a form, has a form, and because of that form, it has a certain function, which is to circulate blood into our body in order for us to be oxidized. Because if you remember, oxygen is an important part of cellular respiration. Without those oxygens pumping through all over our body, our cells will not get oxygen necessary for cellular respiration, and it will undergo a different type called the fermentation, which is still part of our bodily process, but too much can cause us severe problems. Okay, so let's talk about some basic principles of animal form and function. So that's basically the goal of today's lesson. We are moving on from talking about animals to talking about plants. And later on, we will talk more about different functions like reproduction, development, nutrition, how we exchange gases or we oxidize ourselves, also transportation and circulation of blood all over our body, regulation of fluids and heat in our body, our nervous system, our sensory system, and our endocrine system, etc. So the lesson for today is just a basic knowledge about form and functions among species or among the fauna of the earth, which includes us. So a little bit of overview. One thing that is actually very interesting among the fauna or among the animals of the earth is that even though we have very diverse form, so if you see this picture right here where you have a gorilla and you have an octopus, and they're very different structure, they have very different species, and they are living in a very different environment. However, despite having those diverse form among all the faunas in the earth, which also again includes us, we all actually have a lot of common challenges that we face, which includes first, how can we get oxygen in our body? Because remember, oxygen is an important part of cellular respiration. Without oxygen, we won't be able to create ATPs, which is necessary for all the things that we have to do. Next, where do we get nutrition? Where do we hunt for food? Where do we find food in order for us to survive? Because without this nutrition, without this glucose coming into our body, our stomach digesting it in order for our cells to absorb that glucose, again, we will not undergo cellular respiration and we won't be able to create the energy that we needed in order for us to live and survive. Another is fight off diseases and infection. All of us, all the faunas of the earth, even actually the floras, all of us try to fight certain diseases and infections because without our ability to fight them, which includes our immune system, then our survivability will fall drastically. And lastly, all of us experience a challenge in reproduction. How can we pass on to our genes in order for our progeny to survive? More importantly, how are we able to pass on to the genes that will express various phenotype that will be necessary in order for the survivability of our species to become higher? Remember, because in natural selection favors those forms or favors those genes that will help this species survive. And that's where this all encompasses about. The reason that uh, even though we have various forms, a lot of the animals do not share a lot of their physical structure, but but the main fact that we all experience a lot of commonalities when it comes to the things that we have to face in order for us to survive. A lot of our forms actually share. Sorry, a lot of our forms actually share a lot of, or identifying the forms that a species has can actually help us identify its function. So because all the animals undergo this certain type of problems, they have to go a process of evolution in order for them to survive. And a lot of these evolutions that have happened across a lot of animals are very, very similar, which we will learn later is the term called the convergent evolution. So, in order for us to identify why we were able to evolve this way, looking at the anatomy or the anatomical structure of a lot of our species actually provides a clue on how these anatomy provides a certain function in order for us to survive. So, if you look at this right here, this ant, if you notice, they have quite long legs, right? It's kind of like they're standing on its tilt. So their legs are much longer than compared to, let's say, a house ant. The reason for that is because of all over the years, um, these ants were able to evolve in such a way in order for them to survive the scorching heat of the desert. These types of ants are usually found in Sahara Desert, and in order for them to survive, they have to scavenge dead animals all over the desert looking for food. And the desert sand can actually raise up to a certain temperature that is very dangerous, not only to ants like these, but to any creatures that will be subjected under those temperature. So what happened is that they evolved over time and gained these stilt-like legs, which help them raise their body off to the ground, lowering the temperature that they experience, and also make them able to move faster. So if you seen those videos, for example, or if you have tried walking into the scorching ground. So kapag sobrang init and then nagtapak ka dun sa ground and then napaso yung paa mo, what do you usually do? You start to run, you start to move faster. And the reason that you do that is because your body knows that by moving faster, you have less contact onto the hot surface, and you get your parang mas hindi ka nasasaktan. And that's also true for them. They were able to evolve these long structures of legs that are like stilts and help them survive in this type of desert. So identifying this structure right here, this anatomical structure of the legs of these ants right here, gives us an understanding on the physiology or the function why they have such a thing. And all of them, of course, is related to the natural selection. So it all boils down to helping these organisms or this species survive, help them find oxygen, help them find food for nutrition, help them fight, probably in this situation, not diseases, but fight off, escape prey by walking much faster and even being able to reproduce because they survive having this long structure. So all in all, what I'm trying to say here is that despite all of the differences that we have, even as humans, but also all the animals in the earth, all of us experiences a common challenges that results into these types of evolution, which then results into the anatomy that we have. And these anatomies that we all share are actually a lot of them are very, very common. And we will actually look at some of them. And by looking at these anatomies, we will learn more about the functions of these structures. Okay, so let's talk more about form and function. So every time we talk about form and function, a lot of time we think about them about the size, how big the structure is of an animal, as well as the shape. We can also call them as the body plan and the design. And a lot of these sizes and shape that an animal has, not only in its body but some of its structure, is that it actually significantly affect the animal's interaction with its environment. Let's take this for example. Physical constraints affect animal sizes and shapes. Um, I talk about this convergent right here, but one of the most prominent convergence that you can see is if you have been into the ocean, you will notice that a lot of the fast swimming animals usually share the same structure or same shape. So they're kind of like uh, they have usually have pointed nose, and one of the structures that they have is they have this very clean, very slick skin. The reason that they evolved this way is as they swim into the ocean, water is actually much more denser than compared to, let's say, the air that we breathe. So both these animals right here and us share some similarities. One is that we're living in a place where we are experiencing constant pressure. The constant pressure that we are experiencing is a constant pressure of one atmosphere because we are actually surrounded with bunch of air molecules. But the reason that we do not have a very soft skin like this or very slick skin wherein not a lot of bump is happening onto our skin is because air is much less dense compared to the water. Water is so dense that if you have even just a small bump on your body, it will make it harder for you to move and glide through the ocean. So all of these animals right here, these aquatic animals, they share the same structure of kind of like pointed bottle nose, and then they share the same structure of having very smooth skin, because it helps them move faster into the water. So those that's an example of how physical environment or physical constraints that an animal experiences determines the size and the shape of the animal. Another way is in the opposite side, wherein the body sizes and shape also affects the interaction that they have with the environment. Because of the sizes or the body plan and the design that animals possess, a lot of their interaction with the environment is also determined. For example, animal size and shape directly affect the way that the animals exchange materials with its surrounding. For example, we have here an amoeba, a single cell organism. Since it is much more smaller, their structure makes it in a way that it is much easier for them to be able to exchange materials from outside the environment, as opposed to, for example, having a much more complex organism such as the hydra right here, wherein a hydra is actually an organism that has a two layer of um, groups of cells. So you have your inner structural layer and then the outer structural layer. And because of this structure right here, the way that they also interact with the environment changes. So one of the most effective way that you can exchange materials in the environment is having, for example, like a flat body, such as the amoeba right here. But as we go on, there's some constraints still, and to the point that, of course, we as a human is very complex, but we cannot have structures that are very much long, such as the amoeba. We cannot be really flat, otherwise we won't be able to move, right? But if you actually look at a lot of our a lot of our organs, a lot of our organs look folded. If you look at the lining of our stomach, you would actually see those lining folded. And the reason for that is it increases the surface area of that organ, and increased surface area means increase in size, even though our stomach may look really small. But by creating those folds inside our stomach, you are increasing the surface area, which then increases the interaction to the environment in order for you to be able to exchange materials. And you need that because as you eat food, you digest food. The digested food inside for example, in your stomach, and then some of those materials get absorbed onto the lining of your stomach, and then as it goes into your small and large intestines, and large intestines are also folded inside, which increases the surface area, which increases the contact onto the food that you just eaten, which then facilitates a lot of those exchange in the materials in the environment, more specifically glucose. We're going back to cellular respiration. So the body sizes and shape of an organism or their organs also affect their interaction with the environment. Another thing that we can see form and function is through uh, the idea that all of the animals, actually even us, we are all multicellular organisms, and a lot of our cells are actually grouped into tissues. And a lot of animals share various tissues among each other. So we have four main type of tissues: epithelial tissues, which are shades of tightly packed cells, and their function is that they cover the outside of our body and they line the organs. When we talk about line, basically it's the one that creates the covering for the organs. So that's what the lining of a organ is. And then its main function is a form of barrier. And later we're gonna talk more about the epithelial tissues and what's its for. And the second tissues that we have is a connective tissues. Its main function is, from the name itself, is for binding and support. These are tissues that are necessary because it connects a lot of the other tissues to other tissues, or tissues to organs, or even to bones into organs, etc. They are very sparse in population. There's not a lot of them, and they're scattered throughout the extracellular matrix. And there are six types: loose, cartilage, fibrous, adipose, blood, and bone are all types of connective tissues. And then we have the muscle tissues, wherein the muscle tissues are the tissues responsible for the body's movement. Without these tissues, it will be impossible for us to actually move. These muscle tissues, a lot of them, especially for the voluntary movement, are connected to the bone, which is actually a type of connective tissue, and we'll talk about that later, and more so when we talk about movement later on in our lesson or in our discussion about animals. A lot of our all of our muscle tissues actually consist of filaments containing proteins called actin and myosin. And there are three types of muscle tissues: skeletal, cardiac, and smooth. And lastly, the fourth type of main tissues in our body, is the nerve tissues. And its main functions is to serve as a receiver for stimuli that we experience, and then transmit those signals into other neurons and travel it down into our central nervous system, into our brain, for us to identify what that stimulus was, and then our brain transferred it down from our cellular CNS, or central nervous system to our peripheral nervous system in order for us to suddenly be able to move and respond via our muscle tissues and connective tissues. So those are the nerve tissues are necessary, because without this, we won't be able to understand a lot of the things that is happening into our surrounding. The reason that you can actually see is because of these nerve tissues. You have nerve tissues on your eyes that receive signals, but the signals are photons. So they're light signals, and then because of those light signals that your eyes receive, you were able to see, because the nerve tissues connected to your eye, the optical tissues, and they are then connected to the occipital part of your brain, which then interprets what you are seeing visually, and then your frontal brain identifies that, oh yeah, I'm seeing this, so something like that. So those are the nerve tissues. There's two things that we're going to focus about nerve tissues. First is the neurons, which is the functional unit of the nerve tissues, and then glial cells, which is necessary in order for the neuron to thrive, because it nourishes, insulate, and replenish neurons. So let's talk more about epithelial tissues. There's different types of shape and layering of epithelial tissues, but again, just a reminder of what it does. It's that it covers our body and lines our organs, and it is a barrier for a lot of things, such as mechanical injury, invasive microbes, and fluid loss. uh, Imagine if you don't have a skin and then you walk outside, and you will experience a lot of pain, because you will have dust basically scratching your muscles and damaging your blood or your veins, things like that. So without the barrier called our skin, which is a type of epithelial tissues, it will be very, very painful. These epithelial tissues are closely joined together by what we call a tight junctions. And these tight junctions are actually very important, because this is one way for the epithelial tissues to actually be able to communicate from each other. But we'll learn more about these type of communication later on when we talk more about tissues, more specifically to when we talk more about other functions of human body. Epithelial tissues are separated by their shape. You have cuboidal, from the name itself, they're shaped like a cube. And then you have your columnar, which are more like little bricks or columns, such as this, or this is your cuboidal, and then you have your columnar. And then you have your squamous, which are squamous or squamous, which are more like floor tiles. They're much more smaller, and they look like tiles. So that is the shape of the epithelial tissues, and then they can also further separate them by the way of the number of their layering. Simple means it's just you have one single layer of the cell, so such as this right here. These are your simple squamous, simple cuboidal, and simple columnar. And then you have stratified, wherein you have multiple layers of that cell. So you have your stratified squamous here. If you see, they look like tiles that you stack up one top of the other. And then you have your cubes that just stuck up one to the other, the same for columnar. And lastly, you have your pseudo-stratified. Pseudo, from the word pseudo, which means fake, so fake stratified. They look stratified. It's because they have they have various sizes. So the cells have various sizes. So if you look at it at the first time, you may be confused that it looks stratified because they're much longer, but in reality, there's just one single cell, but the sizes are different, so making some look like it's under one of the other. So you have, so this is the epithelial tissues. The next tissues that we have is connective tissues. Like I said, connective tissues' main function is for binding and supporting other tissues, as it holds many tissues and organs together. There are 6 types of connective tissues. First is loose, which is the most widespread connective tissue, and it binds the epithelia to the underlying tissues. So the skin is connected on, for example, onto your muscles via loose connective tissues. And then you have your cartilage, which contains collagenous fibers. These are this makes the cartilage very strong, yet very flexible. And then you have your fibers, which are dense and also combined with collagenous fibers. And these are types of connective tissues that you will usually find on your tendons and ligaments. Tendons are connective tissues which connects your bone onto your muscles, and then you have your ligaments which connects your bone onto the joints. So that's what fibers connective tissue is. And then you have your adipose, which are important because it pads you and it insulates your body. Pads because it stores fat in its adipose cells. And the reason that, for example, you are not having difficulty sitting on the chair is because you have fats on your butt, and those fats helps you be able to support your weight as you sit, no. And also for when it's cold, a storage of fat is necessary in order to keep you warm, because a fat is a type of insulator that can insulate you from, for example, too much cold, things like that. So adipose is also a type of connective tissue. And then you have your blood, as in the blood, the red blood cells and the white blood cells. They are actually type of connective tissues. Red blood cells main function is to carry oxygen, while a lot of the white blood cells that we have, the function is for identifying and destroying a lot of the microbes and viruses that may have come in contact into our body. And lastly, we have bones, which are mineralized connective tissues, which basically creates the skeletal structure that we have. More than the connective tissues, we also have different types of connective fibers or connective tissue fibers, which are collagenous fibers, which provide strength and flexibility. Then you have your elastin, which is not probably as flexible as collagenous fibers, but they are actually very stretchy, and that provides help onto the collagenous fibers. And these elastic connective tissue fibers are made up of elastin. And then you have your reticular, which are thin and branched, and they form this type of woven fabric of fibers. So that is the connective tissue. The next tissue that we are going to talk about is the muscle tissue, which main function is for the body's movement. Without these three important tissues, we won't be able to move. And in general, muscle tissues are composed of protein filaments called actin and myosin. If we have time and if we got to learn on how the body actually moves, this is actually very interesting on how your body moves. It's very complex but very interesting at the same time. There are three types of muscle tissues, which is the smooth muscle tissue, cardiac muscle tissues, and the skeletal muscle tissue. Smooth muscle tissues are basically tissues that you will find on your organs. So they are the walls of your digestive tract, your urinary bladder, your arteries, and other organs. And it is responsible for the involuntary movement of your body. So you have a lot of body movements that are actually involuntary. One of them is the dilation and the what's the other term? Dilate, and I forgot the other term, but depending on the temperature, your blood veins, your arteries can actually dilate. They can increase in sizes, or increase their circumference, or even decrease your circumference depending on the blood pressure, how much blood pressure you need, right? So those types of movements on your body are involuntary because you cannot voluntarily control them. So these types of muscles that needs those types of movement is called smooth muscle. And then you have your cardiac muscle, which is basically the muscle that makes up your heart, and it is striated. So if you look at this, so they're kind of like there's some layers, there's some striation for cardiac muscle. And these are very important because these cardiac muscles, one of the things that makes them unique is that they can create their own electrical impulses, which is actually the reason that our heart beats. So if you go to college and learn more in detail about how your heart beats, that's one of the most fascinating thing that our body has. The cardiac muscles can actually create its own electrical, it's can create its own potential difference, which results into the beating of your heart. And lastly, we have the skeletal muscles, which are basically the metals that are the muscles that are attached to your bones. They are also called the striated muscles, and they're responsible for this time the voluntary movements. The reason that you can move your hand, you can itch your head kapag nangangati kayo, or the reason that you can walk, the reason that I can talk, it's because of these skeletal muscles. These skeletal muscles are attached onto the bones, and then they have signals, they can receive signals, which then tells them to move. So you can point, you can hold, you can talk, you can scream, you can do a lot of things that you can do because of these skeletal muscles. And as you can see, they're attached to they're called skeletal muscles because they're attached to your bones, they're attached to your skeleton. And the reason for that is because the skeleton provides this framework for how your body is. So if these muscles are not attached to that framework, it will be very difficult for your body to move. So those are the muscle tissues. And lastly, we have our nervous tissues. Nervous tissues, their main job is to send stimuli and send signals in the form of nerve impulses. The functional unit of a nerve tissue is called a neuron, which is something that you can see right now. These are the neurons. And it composes of the cell body or the soma, and it has nucleus. You can see right there, it has the nucleus. And then it has what we call an extended part called the axon. And this is where the received impulse from the dendrite travels onto the axon, onto the nerve ending or the terminal button of the axon, which then passed on to either the target or to the next neuron, which will transfer that signal into whatever the target is. There's another types of nervous tissues called the glial cells, which are important because they're the one nourishing these cells. And later on, when we talk about the nervous system, we will learn more on how actually this impulse travels or receivedly traveled, and how the signals are actually release. So those are the four types of muscles that we have. Next, let's move on to the fourth one, which is a fourth part of the Formant function, which is the nervous system and the endocrine system. So the nervous system and the endocrine system are one of the things that is very, again, share a lot of things with a lot of species. The endocrine system is basically the system that releases the signals onto your bloodstream, and these signals are released by endocrine cells called hormones. So the hormones are part of your endocrine system. And its target can either be a single location at your body, or it can even be throughout your whole body. One thing that I want you guys to remember about the endocrine system is that it is slow acting and long lasting. Hormones, when they are released into the body, the effect that they have does not, or you cannot feel it immediately. But once the effect is taken into account, that effect will last much longer. And this is important because this makes endocrine system suited for things like gradual changes in your body, growth and development. Imagine if you grow from being a baby into, let's say, whatever your height is today, 6'2" or 6 foot. So imagine within, let's say, a year, your baby to a 6 foot tall child. That is very taxing for your body. So the endocrine system is the one responsible for releasing your growth hormones. They may be you cannot probably see the effect quickly, but over time you will see that you keep growing and growing and taller. So those are the things that endocrine system is used for. Also reproduction, metabolic process, and digestion. And then you have your nervous system, which is also a single system on your body, but the difference is that instead of releasing it into the bloodstream, the signal of the nervous system is conducted via the nervous cells or the nerve cells and through the axon of the nerve cells. The signal is a type of an electric impulse, and then when it reaches the terminal button, the nerve cells actually releases also different types of neurochemicals. We're not going to talk about that today because that's not the focus. Okay, but there's only three locations wherein the nervous system signal is actually received. One is neurons, when you want to transfer one signal from one neuron to the another neuron to the next neuron, and then also the muscle cells. The reason that you can move is because your brain connects your brain signal onto your muscles and your skeleton via the nervous system. So when you tell your brain to move your right arm, those signals are traveling, telling your right arm to move, and you can move your right arm. And then also they are connected to endocrine system, because endocrine cells, in order for them to release their uh, signals, their hormones, they need to have stimulation from either the nervous system or from another endocrine system. The difference of nervous system and endocrine system that I want you to remember is that for nervous system it is fast acting, but the thing though is that it's short lived. You can immediately feel the effect of the nervous system, but the effect does not last long, and this makes nervous system suited for things that are that you need a lot of quick reactions. So for example, kapag nagluluto kayo and then napaso yung kamay nyo, you cannot rely on the endocrine system to tell your hand that your hand is burning or napaso kayo. That will be very dangerous for you. So what is being stimulated is your nervous system telling your hand to remove it away from the pan. So this signaling system of coordination and control on your body is the physiology, the anatomy that is responsible for that is the nervous system and the endocrine system. So this is the first part of form and function. We will learn more about form and function onto the next part of our lesson. But for now, thank you so much guys for listening, and that is all. Thank you so much and have a great day.